Hey, good morning, everybody. Dr. John Michael Salvato here, and you're watching Inner Alchemy, the science of spiritual living. As we continue to explore the topic of magical thinking and its relationship to the seven Hermetic principles, today we're going to explore how often we find ourselves asking why something happens to us. Why is this going on in my world? What if the answer was not at all what we expected, but everything we could have asked for? We'll talk about that when we come back. Hey, everybody, and welcome back. Today, as I said, we're going to continue this conversation we started just a couple days ago in looking at the topic of magical thinking and what we can do to really harness the ability to bring a greater sense of awareness, a greater sense of efficacy, and better results to our practice on the spiritual path, as well as our practice in day-to-day life. This is a topic that's important to me because I see so many people struggling in efforts to make ends meet and to stay afloat and to really be able to fund the right way of doing their spiritual practice. And in the absence of that, we so often find people who just get all of their information from books, and they're develops from that limited um, uh, contact with the real world, something of an illiteracy, something of a cultural depravity that lacks the contact and connection and oral tradition that comes from working with folks who are your elders, folks who have walked that path before and who have no horse in the race other than trying to encourage you, as so many people did for us. And I'm really excited about bringing that to you today. And so today we're going to talk about the principle of correspondence. Now, some of you might recognize the idea of the principle of correspondence in the words "as above, so below." Now, the actual text of the maxim, as translated by Dennis Hauck in the Emerald Tablets of Hermes, is that which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below to accomplish the miracle of the one thing. Now let's remember that yesterday, or the day before yesterday, when we did the start of this exploration, we talked about there being one universal mind, and that being the one thing. So to accomplish that unity or that singularity, as it might be put, to use Kurzweil's language, then we recognize in this next step, this next principle, that which is above corresponds to that which is below. So in the simplest of terms, the principle of correspondence basically says that our current reality is a mirror of what's going on inside of us. Our reality is a result of our innermost dominant thoughts and beliefs. And sometimes we might not even be aware of those particular beliefs. It doesn't mean that if our lives are filled with unhappiness or chaos or straight up unfulfilling, it's because that's how we are on the inside, or that it's our fault. There were a lot of teachers in the particularly in the 80s and the early 90s, who kind of manipulated this principle into being about shaming people who had illnesses, shaming people who suffered from depression, shaming people who suffered financially, and saying it's your fault. And as we've talked about on some of my previous shows, even one of my teachers, the late Dr. Louise Hay, was directly responsible for a young man going home after one of the hay rides and committing suicide. So I want to be really clear. We're not talking about this being your fault. I'm not saying that if you're sick, it's your fault. I'm not saying that if you're poor, it's your fault. That's not metaphysics. That's ignorant New Age fluff. There have been books that have been written that say otherwise. There have been entire movements that shame people who are poor and sick and even abused. And I'm here to tell you today that that is repugnant. What I mean when I say as within, so without, is that our current reality is a mirror of what's going on inside of us. It's an opportunity for us to take a better look at what's going on inside. So if, for example, we suffer from low self-esteem, then our experience of the world is going to be interpreted through the lens of that belief system. There were folks who, in recent days, took umbrage with my book and said that I was attacking Raven Grimassi or I was attacking Lori Bruno by saying that the origin myth for Stregaria is something that was just born out of the 20th century that really has no basis in reality. And that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with Stregaria. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the origin myth. But it does mean that we have to be literate enough, cognizant enough, and mature enough spiritually and personally to understand that our origin myths are quite often flawed. You know, the arguments that have arisen, in recent days over some people taking a what I thought to be a cute and kind of funny meme that contradicted a meme that I posted myself, talking about our being. There it is. Those who watch the show regularly know that it wouldn't be a show if an ambulance or police car did not go by, or a motorcycle go down the alley. um, but I posted a meme, and that meme said that we're the grandsons of the witches that you failed to burn. And the idea behind that was that, in my family, there were folks who were able to escape persecution and some who were not. In Nazi Germany, there were some who were not able to escape persecution of the gypsies and witches and LGBTQ persons. And then there were also those going further back who were able to escape the clutches of the Inquisition only because of some of the priests who were friendly and involved with the Fattucchieri, with the Benedicaria. And so that was where we started to see the Italian folk magic shift and hide under the veneer of Catholicism, much as we see with Santeria adopting Catholic saints so that we could basically hide in plain sight and have that freedom to be who we are. So these folks were getting their panties in a knot because I said, look, words matter, and it's important that we recognize that some of us really do come from that experience of having had to hide, because some of us are hereditary witches, and I know that for those who are not, many times the lens of low self-esteem through which they interpret their world causes them to feel compelled to attack those who say that they're hereditary witches. And I get it, that there are a lot of people who are so full of shit that there hasn't been a hereditary, there hasn't been a witch in their lineage, probably ever. And they're just doing this because they think somehow being a hereditary witch makes you a better witch or makes you more powerful, makes you whatever. That's all bullshit and nonsense. We've talked about that before. But it does mean that that's your backstory. That is where you learned your craft from. Some folks learn craft from getting involved in religions such as Wicca or Stregaria, where they have to go through initiatory rites, and most of what they learn is wrapped in the principles of ritual magic, wrapped in the principles and the false idea at times that group magic is somehow more powerful than individual magic, when we know that that's nonsense as well. That's somehow that the coven itself is witchcraft embodied, when in fact the coven itself is actually a religious group that honors and in some cases worships various members of the pantheon of gods and goddesses. And so this need to attack is a reflection of what's going on inside, and that's why I don't let it get me off balance. If we believe that our world is cold and a hostile place, then we tend to interpret our experiences through the lens of that belief. If we believe that our experience in the magical path is somehow less than others, we're going to tend to reflect that in the way that we interact with others. But what happens when we choose to think differently? And that was my point, because I really do believe that there's an illiteracy, especially among the younger witches. But that doesn't mean that every younger witch is, every millennial, every Gen Xer is illiterate. It means that there's a disease going on that some of the leaders in that community are actually addressing and doing beautiful things, reinterpreting some of the older traditions, and recognizing that the older traditions really are all 20th century traditions. Nothing has really come from anything further back than that, but that we have an opportunity to change our expression and make it more relevant, make it more beautiful, and to kind of reclaim the source of that power, so that as individuals who recognize our sovereignty, who recognize that the point of power is in the present moment and in the individual, we call that sovereignty, that we can then, as sovereign individuals, as sovereign witches, as sovereign sorcerers or mages, come together and enjoy the artistic and spiritual expression of devotion in whatever form that might take in particular covens, or not. For those of us that do not feel a resonance to that sort of expression, we can do whatever it is that blows our skirts up. And so the fundamental premise of the law of correspondence is that we're all governed by a set of universal laws and principles. And then when we're not operating in alignment with these laws, then nature will have a way of letting us know, so that we can adjust our mindsets, our beliefs, and our actions. So I just got done telling you about how people were attacking a meme that I put up, and the comments that I made on it. But the other side of that was that I had to look at what I was doing. And I was really fortunate that a young man that I just became friends with called me out and said, when you're talking about the functional illiteracy, and the spiritual illiteracy, and the cultural illiteracy of millennials and Gen Xers, you're painting with a very broad stroke. And how can you do that when your articles that you've written on your blog in recent weeks talk about some of the most amazing people that are in the movement today? People like Matt Oren and Devin Hunter, people like Tempa Zakharov, and how can you paint with broad strokes saying that generation is illiterate, and then say these are some of the most literate and powerful and beautiful, expressive people in whom I place a lot of hope for the future of the metaphysical community? And he was absolutely right, because what I was doing then was reacting, not responding, to all of the attacks, and interpreting what was going on and expressing myself through a lens that was warped. And so the second part of that fundamental principle, that premise behind the law of correspondence, is that our experiences aren't changed by placing blame. Blame doesn't change the past, and it never creates a solution in the present moment, so it certainly can't have any impact on the future. So in essence, if we place blame, we're actually trying to escape dealing with the real cause. Now, chaotic data, which is what we call that information of how we interpreted things that happened in the past, whether the past is yesterday, or the past is 5 years ago, or the past is 25 years ago, chaotic data clouds the lens through which we interpret those experiences. So we have to understand that. Now, when we say the law of correspondence, a lot of people say corresponding between what? The principle tells us that there's a direct correspondence between spiritual laws and the manifestation of phenomena, that there are planes beyond our knowledge. But when we understand universal principles, it places us back in our own power. It doesn't give us all of the answers, but it gives us a good frame of reference. It gives us a vantage point for perspective. This is about assuming 100% responsibility for what's going on in our lives. The principle of correspondence enables us to reason intelligently and to move from the microcosm to the macrocosm and back again. And it allows us to do that as often as we want. So here's my take on this. And again, this is my take. And I encourage folks who are watching this series, folks who are following us in both this daily opportunity that we have to share some ideas with you, as well as those who watch the brew and who engage in the conversation there. My interpretation is my interpretation, and you can actually take and discard the entire thing if none of it resonates with you, or you might find that there's something in there that makes you think, and you still might not agree with what I'm saying, but it made you think and it helps you to further your own understanding. Or there may be bits and pieces or the entirety that resonates with you. In any case, I share this as a gift. Again, recognizing that as above, so below. So I give my gift freely, knowing that the gift is going to come freely back to me. So my interpretation is that it doesn't matter one bit what we change on the outside if we haven't done the work on the inside to create real change. Our reality is going to continue to reflect the same bullshit that's going on inside of us, outside of us. And it's only when we really shift within that we're able to evolve, that we're able to see our experiences shift and become a reflection of our new inner beliefs and worldview. And so for me, that was immediately immediately evident today when, because of this mental wellness program that I'm doing, things that for me would have been a challenge, being on the autistic spectrum, um, seeing people who are using words that I find hurtful and that seem attacking, but to be able to stay in my peace. And I recognize that that's because I'm doing the inner work, that I'm able to deal with the outer work with greater peace, greater balance. I didn't feel the need, I didn't feel dirty after the conversation today. I actually felt like I needed to go a step further, and I needed to reach out to the person yesterday who called me out and say thank you. And to another person who called me out who said, I've never had anyone thank me for calling them out on their bullshit. And I said, well, maybe that's part of the problem. And while this universal principle works on all planes for all people equally, it doesn't mean that someone's at fault if something goes wrong. You see, while this principle works on all planes, the person born in poverty in Appalachia did nothing to create those circumstances. The person who's sexually assaulted didn't get raped because they thought poor thoughts, and the person who dies from cancer didn't lack the right belief or the power or the skill to cure themselves. So we have to be really clear about that. It's also not a principle designed to be used as justification for New Age ableism, the ego-driven idea or desire to appear more spiritually evolved because someone lacks the commitment to stand up for social justice principles. I mean, you look at some of the posts that I put on social media, and the ones that are funny, and the ones that are that might be politically obvious, so to speak, or the ones that fit the mainstream view that are comfortable. People comment on those, but if I call out the inability for us to be able to say, let's look at our origin stories and recognize that they are all myths, and recognize in my own story that the idea that our family has practiced for 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years, that's very possible, but it's not something that I can demonstrate or prove. And so for me, I choose to see it as a myth. I've only seen evidence that goes back a little more than 400 or 500 years that's incontrovertible. I've seen some evidence and heard evidence that might make it 1,000 years, 1,200 years, but the idea that in 4,000 or 400 before the Common Era, that we know for a fact what my relatives were doing and where they were going. Sorry, that sounds like mythology to me. And every group has its mythology, and every story has its purpose. It doesn't mean that those stories are historically intact. I've said before that I think Charles Leland made mistakes interpreting what he was seeing in Italy, and as a result of that, when Gardner, Gerald Gardner, interpreted or created Wicca from the material that he saw that Leland, presented, we were building a new belief system, a new spiritual tradition on a misinterpretation of what happened in Italy, and suddenly the story was cemented that witches came from covens, and that the center of witchcraft and the highest form of witchcraft was in a coven, which is not true, because covens were only a religion, and witches weren't the only ones in covens. There were bakers and shoemakers and accountants and whatever in the coven, because this was where they came to worship. This is where they came to honor the gods and goddesses. And sure, a lot of the people who moved into positions of leadership would be witches, because they had the intuition, they had the psychic skill, they had experience with ritual to be able to step into those roles. But we have to remember that when somebody calls something out, it's not an attack. When somebody calls something out, it's an opportunity for us to take a good look and start a conversation. That's what's missing in our world today. We're so divided that we'd rather fight with one another, block one another, call one another names, than begin a discussion that might be uncomfortable at some times. And so I'm here today to tell you that, if we're going to embrace and understand the law of correspondence, we have to understand political neutrality. It might sell more books. It might make your blog publisher happy, or sell more tapes and workshops, but it's definitely not a sign of an evolved mind or spiritual maturity. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Those who are the real leaders in our community, those who are the ones who are movers and shakers, looking back historically, back to one of my early friends and mentors, both looking at Herman Slater, Leo Martel, Dr. Leo Martello, Eddie Basinski. They were people who weren't afraid to rock the boat. And so we really need to recognize that. An old friend of mine who's since moved on, Dr. Wayne Dyer, said, when you change the way you look at the world, the things you look at change. And that's what the law of correspondence is all about. It's about changing the way you look at the world. It's about letting people shake things up for you, and recognizing that as above, so below. So as you begin to shake those things up in your immediate experience, then things on the inside will start to get shaken up. And when those things on the inside start to get shaken up, man, that is where the power is. So the three takeaways that I would offer today for you, because these little chats that we have on a daily basis inform me as much as they do you. They challenge my thinking as much as they challenge yours. So the first takeaway would be that magic is nothing if you haven't learned to work with your beliefs, your thoughts, your energies, to live in greater harmony with nature and the cosmos. And the second takeaway would be that as witches and sorcerers and magicians, we don't change things. We work with the energy around things. You've heard me say this before. We work with the energy around circumstances, around beliefs and situations, to create an atmosphere in which our desired change can occur, and then we take action on it. And so the third takeaway is that we have total and complete control over only one thing in our lives, and that's our thinking. And learning to work with that is where your personal power really begins. And so now it's your turn. It's your turn to personally consider this material and the ideas and the beliefs and philosophies that I've shared and that others have shared, and that folks share in the conversation that follows this, and then draw your own conclusions, because as the image on the screen says, magic isn't about gaining power over others. It's about gaining power over yourself. And so that really is the sum total of what I wanted to share with you guys today. Now, my hope is that as we dig a little bit deeper and we move toward this place next Wednesday, when we have some incredible guests that are going to be talking about how taking the pieces, the various parts of this puzzle, and putting them together in a way that meaningfully moves us toward creating those opportunities, creating those chances for you and I to begin creating new experiences themselves. Taking the raw material and saying, hey, I can turn this into something that becomes a stepping stone and gets me one step closer to my personal goals, whether those are financial goals or relationship goals, whether those are goals in our personal health, in relationships with others, in intimately as well as online. We take the raw material and we then take that next step. And so we're going to talk next Wednesday about how a group of us have taken that material and looked at what was going on around us, especially as we've talked about on some other shows. The friends of mine who've been committing suicide, who are sinking deeper and deeper into depression, folks who are feeling immobilized from PTSD. And because those are things that I really understand, those are things that matter to me, I wanted to do something that would have an impact and provide something creative, something positive, something useful for people to use, even if it's just as a step stool, even if it's just as a rock that they stand on to reach for that next place. So those are the ideas that I have and wanted to share with you. And I have not had an opportunity today to watch the comment feed, so I will do that when we see the replay when this is over. But I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this. I'd love to hear. I don't shirk off people who say, well, I have a different perspective. I don't think that's right. I welcome that. I don't welcome the ones who do it in an attacking way and think that they have to call names and play games. You've seen what I have to say to those kind of people very quickly, because you can take the boy out of drag, but you can't take the drag out of the boy. But if you want to have a real conversation, if you have real questions, I don't think that this is an opportunity for the answers to those questions to only come from me. I think the answers to those questions can come from our community. We can begin a dialogue that says none of us have all the answers, but each of us have all the experiences. And how we interpret those experiences for ourselves is based on the chaotic data that we might be carrying around with us from the past. But when we bring those experiences to the table together, we might gain insights that otherwise we never would have considered because of that chaotic data. So we take 100% responsibility and we say, hey, this is how I interpret this. What do you think? And we listen to the things that come back. You guys have seen that happen on my show with so many of the folks who watch on a regular basis, where we've engaged in some conversations that were really terrific conversations that really challenge me to move and grow and go forward. And that's what I hope this does for each and every one of you. So as we say at the end of these broadcasts, I want to thank you for spending time with us. I want to encourage you to like, share, and subscribe. You'll see down below our channel on YouTube. It's now inneralchemy.online/YouTube. We certainly would appreciate it if you guys would like, share, and subscribe and comment there. As well as over here, you've got the website itself, inneralchemy.online, and right there, you've got our Twitter handle, Gay Chaos Witch. And so I encourage you to stay in the moment. Take this principle of correspondence and bring it to the present moment. Sit with it. Let the information that you saw in today's show wash over you. Maybe watch the replay again and again. And take notes if you need to. See what comes up. And what comes up might take you in a completely different direction. And that's okay. That's where you need to be. Because in the moment is where the power is. In the moment is where we're able to take those next steps and create something more meaningful. I hope these last 30 minutes have been meaningful for you, or helpful, or challenging, or stimulating. And even if they made you say, I completely disagree with this guy, he's a jackass, it made you think. And so it served its purpose. So bring gratitude to the moment. Be grateful for what you've got, because if you can't be grateful for what you've got, there's no reason to think you're going to be any happier with more. And always remember, my friends, the best is yet to come. I'll talk to you soon.